This is not a story meant to scare you. It's a confession that was never meant to be heard. What you're about to listen to is real, or at least, it was real to the person who lived it. Welcome to True Horror Confessions. If you're brave enough to keep listening, subscribe now. Because once these stories begin, they don't let you go. The Man Who Never Unpacked. I need to say this now because I don't think I can carry it much longer. I've been telling myself for 3 years that I misread everything, that I was paranoid, that there's no way what I think happened actually happened. But last month, they found something in the crawl space of a house, 2 towns over. And now I can't sleep. Now, I can't stop wondering if I let it happen, if I watched it happen and said nothing because I was afraid of being wrong. Because being wrong would have made me the bad guy, the paranoid neighbor, the person who ruined an innocent man's life over a gut feeling and some strange sounds through a wall. I've rehearsed this story in my head 1,000 times, trying to figure out where it really started. Was it the day I moved in? The first time I heard the sounds through the wall? The moment I saw her eyes in the lobby? That silent plea I chose to ignore? I still don't know. Memory is strange that way. It rearranges itself to tell the story you need to hear, not necessarily the story that actually happened. But I'm going to try to tell it straight as I can, even the parts that make me look like a coward, especially those parts. I moved into the Ridgewood Commons apartment complex in September of 2019. It was one of those places that looked decent in photos, but felt hollow in person. 3 buildings arranged in a U-shape around a parking lot that never had enough spaces. The units were small but functional, marketed to young professionals and recent graduates who couldn't afford anything closer to downtown. I was 26, working remotely for an insurance company, and recently out of a relationship that had ended with my ex keeping the apartment we'd shared for 2 years. I needed somewhere cheap and available immediately, and Ridgewood Commons fit both criteria. The building I moved into was the oldest of the 3, built in the late 70s and updated just enough to justify the rent increase every year. The hallways smelled like carpet cleaner and something else I could never identify, something faintly organic that I eventually stopped noticing. My unit was on the 2nd floor, apartment 2D, wedged between a retired postal worker named Dolores and a revolving door of short-term tenants who never stayed longer than a few months. I want to be clear about something before I go any further. I'm not a paranoid person. I've never believed in ghosts or conspiracies or anything that couldn't be explained by ordinary human behavior. I'm the kind of person who checks Snopes before sharing articles and assumes strange noises are pipes settling or neighbors being inconsiderate. What I'm about to describe didn't happen because I was looking for something wrong. It happened because something was wrong, and I spent too long convincing myself it wasn't. The first few months were uneventful. I set up my home office in the corner of my living room, got used to the sounds of the building, and developed a nodding acquaintance with the other residents. Dolores was friendly in a distant way, always asking about my work even though she clearly didn't understand what I did. She'd been in her apartment for 23 years, she told me once, and had seen dozens of tenants come and go from the units around her. She had opinions about all of them, mostly charitable, though she never elaborated on the ones who weren't. The couple downstairs, the Gwens, were quiet and kept to themselves. I'd hear them sometimes in the evening, cooking dinner, their voices low and comfortable in that way long married couples have. There was a single mother with 2 kids at the end of the hall, who I rarely saw except when she was rushing them to school in the mornings, always running 5 minutes late, always looking exhausted in that specific way single parents do. The apartment directly across from mine, 2E, had been empty when I moved in. The property manager mentioned something about the previous tenant breaking their lease unexpectedly, which didn't strike me as unusual. People leave apartments all the time. The unit sat vacant through October and most of November, and I'll admit I enjoyed the extra quiet. No shared walls with anyone on that side meant I could watch TV at whatever volume I wanted without feeling guilty. He moved in the weekend before Thanksgiving. I remember because I was irritated about the noise. Moving trucks and furniture being dragged up the stairs and boxes being dropped in the hallway. I was on a deadline for a project and couldn't concentrate. The movers were loud and careless, laughing and shouting to each other in a way that echoed through the whole floor. Around 4 in the afternoon, I gave up trying to work and went to the kitchen to make coffee. That's when I saw him through the peephole, standing in his doorway, looking at something on his phone. He was average in every way I could describe. Medium height, medium build, brown hair cut short, somewhere between 35 and 45 in that way where you can't pin down the age. He was wearing jeans and a plain gray sweatshirt. Nothing remarkable. Nothing that should have registered at all. The kind of person you'd see in line at a grocery store and forget before you reached your car. But something about the way he was standing made me pause with my eyes still pressed to the peephole. He wasn't moving. Not shifting his weight, not scrolling on his phone, not looking around at his new home. He was just standing there, perfectly still, like he was waiting for something. Like he was a mannequin someone had placed in the hallway and walked away from. I told myself it was nothing. People pause. People zone out. I went back to making my coffee and forgot about it until later that night when I heard him in the hallway again. I looked through the peephole, and he was standing in exactly the same spot, in exactly the same position, looking at his phone. Same posture, same angle of his head, like a photograph. That was the first time I felt it. That small, cold feeling in my stomach that I would come to know very well over the next 18 months. The feeling that something wasn't quite right, immediately followed by the certainty that I was being ridiculous. His name was David Chen, according to the mailbox labels that appeared a few days later. I introduced myself the first time we passed each other in the hallway, and he smiled and shook my hand and said it was nice to meet me. His handshake was normal. His smile was normal. He asked how long I'd lived there and whether the hot water pressure was always so inconsistent. A completely ordinary conversation between new neighbors. But he never unpacked. I know that sounds like a strange thing to notice, but hear me out. His apartment shared a wall with my bedroom, and for the first few weeks, I could hear him moving around in there. Footsteps, mostly. Occasional sounds of things being shifted or doors opening and closing. Normal new tenant sounds, but I never heard the sounds you'd expect from someone actually setting up a home. No television, no music, no phone conversations, no cooking. And when I happened to glance through his door on the rare occasions he opened it while I was in the hallway, I saw the same thing every time. Stacks of boxes, still sealed, arranged neatly against the walls. December passed. January, February. The boxes never moved. I started paying attention in ways I'm not proud of. Not actively spying, exactly, but noticing. The way you notice a car alarm that keeps going off at the same time every day, or a neighbor whose dog barks in a pattern you can predict. I noticed that his blinds were always closed, every window, every hour of every day. I noticed that he left for work at exactly 7:42 every morning and returned at exactly 6:15 every evening, except on Wednesdays, when he came back at 8:30. Not approximately those times. Exactly those times. I checked, more than once, watching the clock on my phone while I listened for his footsteps in the hall. 7:42. Every single day. I noticed that he never had visitors. Not once in the months I watched. No friends stopping by, no family members, no delivery people he had to sign for. I noticed that he never received packages, which seemed strange to me. Everyone gets packages these days. Everyone orders something online eventually. But his door remained undecorated by the brown boxes that accumulated outside everyone else's apartments. I noticed that his car, a dark blue Honda Accord with a small dent in the rear bumper, was always parked in the same spot, and that he always backed into the space instead of pulling forward. The same angle, the same position, like he was parking in a marked space only he could see. None of these things were suspicious on their own. I knew that. I kept telling myself that. Some people are creatures of habit. Some people are private. Some people take a long time to settle into a new place. But something about the precision of his routine felt off to me. Not the routine itself, but the way he executed it, like he was following a script he'd memorized, rather than living a life. The first time something happened that I couldn't explain away was in March, about 4 months after he moved in. I was coming home late from a rare in-person meeting at the office, around 10:30 at night. The parking lot was mostly dark, with only a few functioning lights near the building entrances. The rest had been out for weeks, and the property manager kept promising to fix them without ever actually doing it. I was walking toward my building, keys already in my hand, thinking about nothing in particular, when I saw David standing next to his car. Just standing there, Not getting in or out, not looking at his phone, not doing anything. Just standing. The temperature must have been in the low 40s, cold enough that my breath made little clouds in front of my face. He wasn't wearing a coat. He wasn't shivering. He was just standing perfectly still, his arms at his sides, facing the tree line at the edge of the property. I almost said hello, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the way he was facing, directly toward those dark trees where nothing moved. Maybe it was how still he was, how completely motionless, like a deer that had heard a sound and frozen in place. Maybe it was just the darkness and the cold and the long day catching up with me. I veered toward the other entrance instead, the one that would take me up the back stairs, and I didn't look back until I was at the door. He was in the same position. He hadn't moved at all. Not an inch. Not a shift of weight. Nothing. I went up to my apartment and told myself he was probably just getting some air or taking a phone call I couldn't see, but I couldn't shake the image of him standing there, perfectly motionless, facing the dark trees like he was waiting for something to come out of them. That night, I heard something new through the wall. Not footsteps this time, but a sound I couldn't identify. A wet sound, rhythmic and soft, like someone squeezing a sponge. It lasted for about 20 minutes, and then it stopped, and I didn't hear anything else until his footsteps resumed around 6:30 inches the morning, following their usual pattern toward the door. I want to be clear. I didn't jump to conclusions. I didn't assume the worst. I came up with a dozen innocent explanations. Maybe he was doing laundry by hand. Maybe he had a humidifier that made strange noises. Maybe he was washing dishes, and the sound traveled weird through the walls. I was determined not to be the paranoid neighbor who called the police because someone's plumbing sounded suspicious. But I started keeping a mental note of the sounds, just in case. Just so I could prove to myself that there was a pattern, a rhythm, something normal that I'd eventually figure out. I bought a notebook and started writing them down, dates and times and durations, feeling foolish the entire time, like a paranoid person building evidence for a case that didn't exist. The wet sounds happened every few nights, always between 10 p.m. and midnight, always for 15 to 30 minutes. They were always followed by silence, complete silence, the kind of silence that felt almost intentional, like someone holding their breath, until morning, when his footsteps would resume their usual pattern toward the door. Sometimes, lying in bed listening, I would try to imagine innocent explanations. He was hand-washing delicate clothing. He was cleaning something that required a lot of water. He was practicing some obscure hobby I'd never heard of that involved rhythmic squeezing motions. But the sounds never varied in a way that matched any of those explanations. They were too consistent, too regular, like a ritual being performed, step by step, the same way, every time. Spring came. The complex started to feel different, though I couldn't say exactly how. Dolores mentioned that her cat had been acting strange, hiding under the bed and refusing to come out for meals. The Nguyens complained about a smell in the stairwell, something rotten, though the maintenance guy couldn't find the source. The single mother at the end of the hall asked me if I'd noticed anything weird with the hot water lately, if it sometimes ran red for a few seconds before clearing. I hadn't. But after she mentioned it, I started checking. I should tell you about the trash. Every apartment had a small storage area on their balcony for garbage and recycling, with pickup happening twice a week, Tuesdays and Fridays. You'd put your bags in the bin provided by the complex, and the maintenance crew would come around and collect them. It was a system that worked well enough, though people complained about the smell in summer. I could see David's balcony from my living room window if I stood at the right angle, kind of craning my neck and looking past the corner of the building next door. I started looking, not constantly, but often enough to notice that his storage area was always empty. No garbage bags, no recycling, nothing. Not on pickup days, not between pickup days, not ever. That could mean a lot of things. Maybe he took his trash directly to the dumpster every day, making multiple trips to avoid accumulation. Maybe he didn't generate much waste, living some minimalist lifestyle I couldn't imagine. Maybe he was extremely meticulous about disposal, bagging and removing things before they had a chance to pile up. But combined with everything else, it started to feel like a piece of a puzzle I wasn't sure I wanted to complete. People generate trash, It's one of the most basic facts of existence. We consume things, and those things leave residue, and that residue has to go somewhere. Everyone throws things away. Everyone except, apparently, David Chen in apartment 2E. In April, I finally saw inside his apartment. It was an accident. He was coming out as I was coming in, and for a moment, before the door swung shut on its automatic closer, I had a clear view of his living room. The boxes were still there, still sealed, still arranged against the walls in neat stacks that hadn't moved an inch since the day he arrived. The tape on them wasn't even dusty. It was like they'd been placed there and then preserved in amber, waiting for something. But now there was something else. A single folding chair positioned in the exact center of the room, facing the wall that separated his unit from mine. A cheap metal chair, the kind you'd see in a church basement or a school auditorium. Nothing else. No furniture, no television, no decorations, no signs that anyone actually lived there or intended to live there. Just the boxes and the chair. The chair was facing my wall, not the window, not the door, not the kitchen. My wall. The wall I slept against. I said something like, "Hey, nice to see you," as we passed, my voice coming out higher and stranger than I intended. He smiled and said, "You too," and walked down the stairs with his usual measured pace. I stood in my doorway for a long moment after he was gone, trying to understand what I'd seen, trying to make it make sense. A chair facing a wall. My wall. I told myself it could be anything. Maybe he meditated. Maybe he was minimalist. Maybe he was going through something difficult and hadn't had the energy to set up a proper home. People lived all sorts of ways that seemed strange from the outside, but made perfect sense to them. But that night, lying in bed, I became aware of something I'd been filtering out for months. The silence from his side of the wall. Not just the absence of sound, but an active silence, a density to the quiet that felt almost physical. And beneath it, so faint I almost convinced myself I was imagining it, the sound of breathing. I didn't sleep well after that. May brought two developments that I still think about constantly. The first was a smell. Not the rot that the Nguyen's had complained about in the stairwell, but something different, something that seemed to come from David's apartment specifically, seeping through the shared wall and into my bedroom. It was faint at first, barely noticeable, easy to attribute to the building's old ventilation system or something dying in the walls, but it grew stronger over the course of the month. A sweet, chemical smell, with something organic underneath it, like flowers placed over something decaying. I mentioned it to the property manager during a routine maintenance request, trying to sound casual. I said something might have died in the walls, maybe a mouse or a squirrel. He sent someone to check, and they found nothing. The smell persisted. The second development was the woman. I saw her for the first time on a Saturday morning in mid-May, around 9 or 10 a.m. The parking lot was busy. People running errands, enjoying the first real warmth of the year. She was walking into the building with David, and for a moment, I felt relief. Actual, physical relief that loosened something in my chest. He has a girlfriend, I thought. He's normal. He has a relationship like normal people have. All my concerns were just the projections of someone who'd been living alone too long, watching too many true crime documentaries, turning an eccentric neighbor into something sinister because I was bored and isolated and looking for patterns that weren't there. She was younger than him, maybe late 20s, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and a quiet smile that seemed tentative, almost shy. She didn't look at me as they passed, which struck me as slightly odd, but not alarming. People are allowed to be shy. Some people don't make eye contact with strangers. It doesn't mean anything. They went into his apartment, and I heard their footsteps for about an hour, moving around in patterns I couldn't quite follow, before everything went silent again. The usual silence, the weighted silence. The silence I'd come to think of as his signature. I saw her 3 more times over the next month, always arriving with David, always quiet, always gone by evening. I never heard them talking. I never heard television or music or any of the sounds you'd expect from a couple spending time together. Just footsteps, then silence. The 4th time I saw her, in early June, something was different. I was checking my mail in the lobby when they came in from the parking lot. The lobby was small and dim, with a row of brass mailboxes along one wall and fluorescent lights that hummed faintly overhead. She was walking slightly behind him, her head down, her arms wrapped around herself like she was cold, even though it was 70 degrees outside. Her shoulders were hunched in a way they hadn't been before, drawn inward, making herself smaller. As they passed me, she glanced up for just a second, and our eyes met. I don't know how to describe what I saw in her face. Not fear, exactly. Fear is an active emotion, a response to something immediate and threatening. This was something deeper, something that had gone past fear and come out the other side into a kind of resignation I'd never seen before. Her eyes met mine, and I felt like she was trying to communicate something, trying to send a message she couldn't say out loud. A plea, a warning, an apology. And then they were past me, and David was holding the door to the stairwell open for her, and she walked through without looking back. I heard their footsteps ascending, his steady and measured, hers slower, heavier, like she was walking towards something she didn't want to reach. I stood in the lobby for a long time after they were gone. I told myself I was overthinking it. She might have been having a bad day. They might have been in the middle of an argument. There were 100 explanations that didn't involve anything sinister, but I couldn't stop thinking about her eyes. I didn't see her again after that day. Not once. I watched for her, more actively than I want to admit, but she simply stopped appearing. David's routine continued exactly as before. 7:42 out, 6:15 back, 8:30 on Wednesdays. Same car, same parking spot, same precise footsteps in the hallway. I considered calling the police. I really did. But what would I say? My neighbor has boxes he hasn't unpacked. He doesn't seem to eat or make noise like a normal person. He had a girlfriend who looked sad, and now I don't see her anymore? They would have laughed at me. Or, worse, they would have talked to David, and he would have known that I was watching him, paying attention, keeping track. So I did nothing. I told myself to mind my own business. I told myself that I was letting loneliness and boredom and too much true crime content warp my perception of a perfectly ordinary man. Summer passed. The smell from his apartment faded and then returned stronger. The wet sounds through the wall continued their irregular pattern. I started wearing headphones to bed so I wouldn't have to hear the breathing, which I was no longer sure I was imagining. In August, Dolores's cat disappeared. She knocked on my door one evening, clearly distressed, asking if I'd seen him. He was an indoor cat named Biscuit, orange and white, 13 years old. He'd gotten out somehow, slipped through a door or a window she'd left cracked, and she couldn't find him anywhere. I helped her search the building and the grounds for hours, checking under bushes and behind dumpsters, calling his name until our voices were hoarse. We didn't find him. What we did find, near the tree line at the edge of the property, was a patch of dirt that looked recently disturbed. It was probably nothing. It was probably where the groundskeepers had been doing some kind of maintenance or where an animal had been digging. But Dolores stopped when she saw it, and she got very quiet, and she didn't want to search anymore after that. Biscuit never came back. September marked 1 year since David had moved in. The boxes in his apartment hadn't moved. The chair still faced my wall. The smell still came and went. The wet sound still happened in the night, and I had become someone I didn't recognize. Hypervigilant, anxious, jumping at every noise from across the hall. I started looking up missing persons in the area. I don't know what I expected to find. Maybe confirmation that I was crazy, that nothing was happening, that the woman I'd seen was living her life somewhere perfectly happy and completely unrelated to my neighbor. Maybe I wanted to prove myself wrong. Maybe I wanted someone, even a database, to tell me that I was imagining things, that the world was exactly as normal as I needed it to be. What I found instead was a list of names I couldn't stop reading. There had been 4 women reported missing in the greater metropolitan area in the past 2 years. Different ages, different backgrounds, different circumstances. A nursing student who never showed up for her shift, a freelance photographer who stopped returning calls, a receptionist whose car was found at a trailhead she'd never mentioned planning to visit, an insurance adjuster who left work one Friday and never made it home. The only thing they had in common was that they'd last been seen in the general vicinity of our part of town, within a 15-mile radius of Ridgewood Commons, and none of them had ever been found. I need you to understand that this didn't prove anything. People go missing all the time. The statistics are horrifying when you actually look at them. The area covered dozens of square miles and hundreds of thousands of residents. There was absolutely no evidence connecting any of those cases to David Chen in apartment 2E, except for a feeling in my gut that I couldn't shake, a certainty that had no basis in fact but felt more real than anything I'd ever known. I started taking pictures, not of David directly. That felt too dangerous, too likely to be noticed, too likely to draw his attention in ways I couldn't predict, but of his door, photographed every day at the same time to document any changes. Of his car, always in its spot, always at the same angle, the license plate numbers burned into my memory. Of his parking spot, empty in the mornings and filled in the evenings with mechanical precision. Of his empty balcony, week after week, month after month, never a single bag of garbage. I took screenshots of his mailbox label, the name that might or might not have been real printed on that little card. I wrote down the dates and times of his arrivals and departures, creating spreadsheets I told myself were evidence, but felt more like obsession. I recorded the sounds through my bedroom wall, holding my phone up to the painted drywall in the dark, trying to capture something, anything, that would prove I wasn't imagining things. The recordings never came out clearly enough to be identifiable as anything specific, just static, mostly. The ambient hum of an old building settling, the whisper of wind against windows, the distant sounds of traffic from the highway. Sometimes there was something else underneath, a rhythm that didn't match any natural sound I could identify, but it was always too faint, too unclear, too easy to dismiss as imagination, or interference, or the audio artifacts of a cheap smartphone microphone. I was building a file. I didn't know what I was going to do with it. I didn't know who would believe me, or what authority would take a collection of photographs and spreadsheets and garbled recordings as evidence of anything other than a lonely person losing their mind. I just knew that if something happened, if the truth ever came out, I wanted to be able to show that I'd noticed, that I'd been paying attention, that I hadn't just looked the other way while something terrible happened 3 feet from my bedroom wall. October brought the first cold snap, and something else. A new woman. I saw her in the hallway on a Friday evening, around 6:30. Just after David's usual return time. She was standing outside his door, waiting for him to let her in, her hands shoved in the pockets of a light jacket that wasn't quite warm enough for the weather. She was blonde this time, older than the last one, maybe mid-30s, with the kind of face you'd describe as pleasant rather than beautiful. She smiled at me when I passed, a normal, friendly smile, the kind of smile strangers give each other in apartment hallways across America every day. "Cold one tonight, isn't it?" she said. I agreed that it was, and went into my apartment and stood by the door, listening for the sound of his door opening and closing. I heard them inside for about 2 hours. Footsteps, the occasional murmur of conversation too quiet to make out through the wall. Then, silence. The usual silence, the weighted, purposeful silence that felt like something being hidden. I saw her leave the next morning, walking out of the building alone while David's car was still in its spot. She looked fine, unhurried, normal, checking her phone as she walked to her car the way anyone would. I watched her drive away, a silver Nissan with a bumper sticker I couldn't read, and told myself that everything was okay, that I'd been wrong about everything, that whatever was happening in David's apartment, this woman was part of it willingly. She came and went freely. She didn't have that look in her eyes that the other one had. Maybe the first woman had just been having a bad day. Maybe they'd broken up, and this was a new girlfriend, and the cycle was starting over in a perfectly innocent way. She came back the following weekend, and the weekend after that, I started to relax. Whatever was happening in David's apartment, this woman was part of it willingly. She came and went freely. She didn't have that look in her eyes that the other one had. Maybe I'd misread the whole situation. Then, in early November, she stopped coming, just like before. One day she was there, and then she wasn't, and David's routine continued exactly as before, unchanged by her presence or absence. The only difference was the smell, which came back stronger than ever, so strong that I finally complained to the property manager again. This time, he took it seriously. The smell was affecting the whole floor now, not just my apartment. Other residents had complained. He scheduled an inspection of David's unit. giving him 48 hours notice as required by the lease. I was home when the inspection happened. I heard the property manager knock on David's door, heard David answer, heard them exchange pleasantries. I heard them walk through the apartment, the property manager asking questions about ventilation and plumbing, David responding in that calm, measured voice I'd come to know so well. The inspection took about 15 minutes. The property manager emerged alone, looking satisfied. "Found the problem," he told me when I opened my door to ask. He had some old food in the fridge that had gone bad. Common issue in these older units. The seals on the refrigerators aren't great. He's going to clean it out. Should be fine in a day or two. I wanted to ask more questions. I wanted to ask what David's apartment had looked like, whether the boxes were still there, whether the chair was still facing my wall, but I couldn't figure out how to phrase any of that without sounding insane, so I just thanked him and closed my door. The smell did get better after that. Not gone, but better. And I told myself that maybe the property manager was right. Maybe it had been old food all along. Maybe everything I'd been noticing for the past year had innocent explanations that I was too paranoid to see. I almost believed it. Then December came, and Mrs. Nguyen died. I heard it from Dolores first. She knocked on my door with the news, her face pale, her hands shaking, her voice barely above a whisper like she was afraid of being overheard. Mrs. Nguyen had been found in her bathtub by her husband, who'd come home from a business trip early, expecting to surprise her for their anniversary. The police said it was natural causes, some kind of heart condition no one knew she had. There was no investigation, no suspicion of foul play, no reason for anyone to think it was anything other than a tragic accident. A woman in her 60s, living with an undiagnosed cardiac issue, finally succumbing in the bathroom where the steam and the heat had been too much for her weakened heart. But here's the thing. The Nguyen's apartment was directly below David's. Directly below. Their ceiling was his floor. Whatever sounds came from his apartment, whatever weight moved across his living room in the night, they would have heard it. They would have heard all of it. I know how that sounds. People die of natural causes all the time. Heart conditions can go undetected for years, for decades even. The fact that she lived in the same building as someone I found suspicious didn't mean anything. Correlation isn't causation. Proximity isn't evidence. But when I think about her now, I realize I hadn't seen her in weeks. Maybe longer. I'd seen Mr. Nguyen coming and going, but not her. She'd always been the more visible one, the one who chatted in the hallway and complained good-naturedly about the weather, and then she'd just stopped appearing. And I'd heard things, late at night, sounds from below that I'd attributed to pipes or settling or any of the normal noises old buildings make. But what if they weren't? What if she'd heard something she shouldn't have? What if she'd started paying attention the way I was paying attention? I started having trouble sleeping after that, not just because of the noises through the wall, which continued in their irregular pattern, but because of the thoughts I couldn't turn off, the pattern I saw forming even though I didn't want to see it. Women who appeared and then disappeared, absorbed into that apartment and never seen again. A neighbor who didn't seem to live like a person should live, who followed routines too precise to be natural, who made sounds in the night that no innocent activity could explain. A smell that came and went, but never fully went away, always strongest in the hours before dawn. I started looking at David differently when I passed him in the hall, studying his face for signs of something I couldn't name, something that would confirm my suspicions or dispel them entirely. He always looked the same, calm, ordinary, forgettable, the kind of face you'd see on a commuter train and not remember an hour later. But sometimes, when I caught him at the right angle, when the light hit him a certain way, I thought I saw something else, a flatness in his eyes, a stillness that went beyond introversion into something I didn't have a word for, the sense that the face I was looking at was a performance, a carefully constructed mask designed to blend in, to avoid attention, to pass unnoticed through a world that would recoil in horror if it ever saw what was underneath. He never reacted to my scrutiny, never seemed to notice that I was watching him more closely than before, that I held his gaze a second longer than natural, that I studied him like a specimen under glass. Either he was oblivious, genuinely unaware of my attention, or he was very, very good at pretending to be. I didn't know which option frightened me more. Christmas came and went. I spent it at my parents' house 2 states away, and I don't think I've ever been so relieved to leave a place behind. For 4 days, I didn't have to listen for sounds through the wall. I didn't have to check the parking lot for his car. I didn't have to smell whatever was seeping through the ventilation from his apartment. When I came back, something had changed. The boxes were gone. I only knew because his door was open when I walked by, propped open while he carried something to the trash chute. For just a second, I saw inside. The folding chair was still there, still facing my wall, but the boxes, the dozens of sealed boxes that had been there for over a year, were gone. I don't know why that scared me more than anything else. Maybe because it meant something was ending. Maybe because, if the boxes were gone, I couldn't pretend anymore that he was just a slow unpacker, a private person, someone normal who happened to have strange habits. The boxes being gone meant he'd been waiting for something, and now whatever he'd been waiting for was done. That night, I heard the wet sounds through the wall again, louder this time, more sustained, lasting for hours instead of minutes. I put my headphones on and turned the volume all the way up. I lay in bed with my eyes open, watching the wall he was on the other side of, the wall his chair faced when he sat in his empty apartment doing whatever he did. I should have left. I know that now. I should have broken my lease and moved out and never looked back. But leaving felt like admitting that everything I suspected was real, and I still wasn't ready to do that. I still wanted to believe that there was an explanation, that I was wrong, that I would feel stupid someday for being so paranoid about a perfectly innocent man. January was the coldest month on record. The heating system in the building struggled to keep up, and most of us spent the month huddled under blankets, complaining to each other in the hallways about the inadequate insulation. David was the only one who didn't seem affected. I saw him every day in the same clothes he always wore, that same gray sweatshirt and jeans. Never a coat, never shivering, never rushing to get inside out of the cold. I mentioned it to Dolores once, trying to make it sound like a joke. "That guy across the hall must have antifreeze for blood," I said. "I've never seen him wear a jacket." She didn't laugh. She just looked at me with something in her eyes that I recognized because I felt it too. "I don't like him," she said, very quietly. "I don't know why. I just don't." That was the moment I realized I wasn't alone. That whatever I'd been noticing, whatever had been setting off alarm bells in my head for over a year, other people were noticing too. We were all just too polite, too afraid of being wrong, too conditioned to mind our own business to say anything about it. I started talking to the other residents more after that. Casual conversations in the laundry room or the parking lot, the kind where you complain about the building or the weather or the property manager. I never asked about David directly. I never mentioned his name or his apartment number. I just listened. I became a collector of offhand remarks and passing complaints, piecing them together into a picture no one else seemed to want to see. The single mother at the end of the hall mentioned that her kids were afraid to walk past 2E. She laughed when she said it, that embarrassed laugh parents make when their children believe in monsters. But there was something underneath the laugh that wasn't amusement. She didn't know why they were scared. They just didn't like that door. They said it felt wrong. They always asked to take the back stairs instead, even though it meant going all the way around the building. The young couple who'd moved in across the hall from Dolores said they'd heard strange sounds at night. Not from any specific direction, just strange sounds, like something heavy being dragged across the floor. They'd assumed it was someone moving furniture at odd hours, college kids or shift workers who kept weird schedules. But it happened too often for that to make sense. Once a week, sometimes twice, always between midnight and 3 in the morning. An older man on the first floor said his dog wouldn't go near the stairwell anymore. She was a Labrador mix, friendly and fearless, the kind of dog that bounded up to strangers and wagged her tail at everything. She'd been fine for years, using those stairs multiple times a day. But something changed a few months ago, and now she whimpered and pulled away every time they got close to that door. She'd plant her feet and refuse to move, her ears flat against her head, making a sound in her throat that wasn't quite a growl and wasn't quite a whine. No one mentioned David by name. No one made accusations. But when I listened between the lines, I heard what we were all saying. Something was wrong in this building, and we didn't know how to talk about it. February brought the police. Not because of anything I did, not because anyone finally reported their suspicions. They came because David's car had been identified on a traffic camera near the area where one of the missing women had last been seen. 2 detectives knocked on his door on a Wednesday evening while I was making dinner. I heard them through the wall, muffled voices, too quiet to make out words. They were there for about half an hour. When they left, they didn't have David with them. I wanted to stop them in the hallway, to tell them everything I'd noticed over the past 16 months. But what did I actually know? He had boxes. He had a chair. He made weird sounds at night. His apartment smelled funny. None of that was evidence of anything, except being a weird neighbor. So I said nothing. Again. David's routine didn't change after the police visit. Same time out in the morning. Same time back at night. Same precise footsteps. Same flat smile when we passed in the hallway. If he was worried about the police, he didn't show it. But something else changed. The sounds at night got more frequent. And sometimes, late at night, I would hear something that sounded almost like humming, a low, tuneless sound, barely audible, going on and on for hours. I recorded it. I don't know why. I knew no one would believe me, that the recordings would sound like nothing, like the ambient noise of an old building settling. But I recorded it anyway, timestamp after timestamp, hour after hour of almost silence that felt, to me, like proof of something terrible. March was when I started planning to move. I couldn't do it immediately. My lease ran through September, and breaking it early would cost me 2 months' rent I couldn't afford. But I started looking at other apartments, other neighborhoods, anywhere that wasn't here. I updated my resume in case I needed to find a job in a different city. I started packing my own boxes, just a few at a time, getting ready for whenever I could finally leave. David noticed. He didn't say anything directly, but I saw him looking at me differently when we passed in the hall. There was something new in his eyes, something that might have been amusement or might have been something worse. Moving? He asked one day, gesturing at the box I was carrying to my car. Just decluttering, I said, too quickly. You know how it is, he nodded, that same measured nod he always gave. It's good to stay organized, he said. You never know when you might need to leave quickly. I don't think I responded. I just got in my car and drove away, my hands shaking on the wheel, his words echoing in my head. Was that a threat? A warning? Just an innocent comment from someone who didn't understand how it sounded? I couldn't tell. I couldn't tell anything about him. That was the problem. The rest of March passed in a blur of anxiety and sleepless nights. I stopped eating properly. I lost weight. I jumped at every sound from across the hall, every footstep, every creak of the floor. I was becoming someone I didn't recognize, paranoid, obsessive, trapped in a spiral of suspicion I couldn't escape. Then April came, and the woman in 3B disappeared. Her name was Rachel Kim. She was 24 years old, worked as a paralegal at a small firm downtown, had lived in the building for about 8 months. She was friendly and outgoing, the kind of person who said hi to everyone and remembered names and always held the door when someone was coming in behind her. I'd talked to her maybe a dozen times, brief exchanges about the weather or the parking situation or the inconsistent hot water. She seemed happy, normal, the kind of person who has their whole life ahead of them and knows it. She was reported missing on April 7th by her mother, who hadn't heard from her in 4 days. Rachel called her mother every day. Every single day, without fail, had done it since she was 18 and moved away for college. 4 days of silence was unthinkable, impossible. Something had to be wrong. The police came back to the building, this time in force. 3 patrol cars, 2 detectives, a team of officers who searched the grounds and interviewed residents and went door to door asking if anyone had seen or heard anything unusual. They set up a command post in the parking lot. They brought dogs. They taped off sections of the property and took photographs of things I couldn't see from my window. They talked to David. Of course they talked to David. He lived directly across from her, the closest neighbor she had. But whatever he told them, it must have been satisfactory, because they didn't take him in for questioning. They didn't search his apartment. They didn't seem to suspect him of anything at all. They just noted his statement and moved on to the next door, the next interview. the next dead end, in a case that was already going cold. I told them about the sounds, about the smell, about everything I'd noticed for the past 18 months. The detective listened patiently, took notes, and thanked me for my time. I could see in her eyes that she thought I was just another paranoid neighbor looking for attention during a crisis. I don't blame her. I couldn't articulate what I suspected without sounding insane. My neighbor is too quiet? His boxes were sealed for too long? He doesn't seem to eat? None of that means anything in the real world, where people disappear for their own reasons, and sometimes the explanations are mundane and disappointing. Rachel Kim was never found. The investigation went cold within a few weeks. The police followed up on leads that went nowhere. Her family posted flyers around the neighborhood. The local news did a segment that aired once and was never repeated. Life in the building went on, because life always goes on, even when something terrible is happening right in front of you. I couldn't sleep anymore. Not really. I would lie in bed for hours, listening to the silence from David's apartment, wondering if she was in there, if any of them were in there, if the boxes that had finally been unpacked had contained something other than belongings. I started drinking more than I should have. Just to take the edge off, I told myself. Just to make the nights bearable. But it got worse, and I knew it was getting worse, and I couldn't seem to stop. May was the last month I lived in that apartment. I don't remember exactly what happened. I don't want to remember. I know I drank too much one night and decided I was done being silent, done being careful, done pretending I didn't know what I knew. I remember standing outside David's door at 3 a.m, my fists clenched, my heart pounding. I remember knocking, or maybe pounding, loud enough to wake the whole floor. I remember his door opening, just a crack, and his face appearing in the gap, calm as always, that flat smile on his lips. "Can I help you?" he asked, like I was a delivery person who'd come to the wrong address. I don't remember what I said. Something about Rachel, something about the sounds through the wall, something about knowing what he was, what he'd done, what was behind that door. The words came out jumbled and desperate, fueled by alcohol and months of accumulated terror. I probably sounded insane. I probably looked insane, standing there in my pajamas at 3 a.m, swaying slightly, my eyes red and wild. He just looked at me for a long moment. His face didn't change. That flat, pleasant expression didn't waver, didn't shift, didn't reveal anything at all. It was like looking at a mask, a very good mask, the kind that could fool anyone who wasn't paying attention, but still a mask, still something covering whatever was underneath. Then he said, very quietly, in a voice that was somehow colder than anything I'd ever heard, "You should be careful. People who ask too many questions sometimes find answers they weren't looking for." He held my gaze for another second, maybe 2, long enough for me to understand that it wasn't an idle comment, long enough for me to feel the threat in every syllable. Then he closed the door, slowly, deliberately, and I was standing alone in the hallway, shaking, realizing that I'd just made a terrible mistake, that I'd shown him my hand, that he knew now, if he hadn't known before, that I was watching him, that I suspected him, that I was a problem. I moved out the next day. Didn't wait for the lease to end. Didn't care about the money. I threw everything I could fit in my car and drove to my parents' house and didn't look back. I lived with them for 3 months while I found a new apartment in a different city, a different state, somewhere he would never find me. I never reported what he said. I never went back to the police with my recordings or my notes or my theories. I just ran, like a coward, like someone who valued their own safety more than the truth. That was 3 years ago. I've tried to move on. I have a new apartment now, a new job, something resembling a normal life. I don't drink anymore. I sleep better than I did then, though still not great. I go to therapy sometimes, when I can afford it, and my therapist tells me I did the best I could with the information I had, but I can't stop watching the news. I can't stop searching for updates on the missing women, on Rachel Kim, on any of the names I memorized from those sleepless nights of research. I can't stop wondering if David Chen is still in apartment 2E, following his perfect routine, waiting for the next woman to appear and disappear. And then, last month, they found something. A house 2 towns over from Ridgewood Commons had been foreclosed on after the owner died. The owner was an older man, lived alone, kept to himself. Sound familiar? When the cleanup crew went in to clear it out, preparing the property for auction, they found a door to the basement that had been sealed from the outside. Not locked, sealed. Someone had screwed a metal plate over it and painted it to match the wall. Behind the door, they found a room. Behind the room, they found what was left of 7 people. The investigation is still ongoing. The news reports don't say much, just that the remains were in varying stages of decomposition, that some had been there for years, that the identities are still being determined through dental records and DNA. They don't say how those people died. They don't say what was done to them. They don't say anything that would help me understand whether this has anything to do with David, whether the man who owned that house knew him, whether they were connected somehow. I don't know if David lived in that house. I don't know if the owner who died was someone he knew or someone he was, or just a complete stranger whose basement happened to contain horrors of its own. I don't know if the 7 people were the women I'd wondered about, the ones who appeared at David's apartment and then vanished, or strangers I'd never heard of whose paths never crossed with mine. But I know that when I read the news article, when I saw the photos of that sealed basement door, I recognized something. I recognized the feeling of knowing something was wrong and doing nothing about it, of being so afraid of being wrong that I let myself be wrong about everything else. I don't know what David Chen was. I don't know what happened in that apartment. I don't have proof of anything, just suspicions, just the memory of a smell that never quite went away, and sounds that never quite made sense, and a flat smile that never quite reached his eyes. But I know that something was happening while I lived there, something I chose not to see because seeing it would have meant admitting that the world was darker than I wanted it to be. I know that at least 2 women disappeared from that building while I was there. I know that others died under circumstances no one questioned too closely. I know that every instinct I had was screaming at me to do something, say something, trust myself, and I know that I didn't. I went back once, about a year ago. Just drove by. Told myself I wasn't going to stop, just wanted to see if the building was still there. I don't know what I was looking for. Closure, maybe. Evidence that I'd been wrong, that everything was fine, that the world had continued turning in my absence without incident. It was. It looked exactly the same. Same 3 buildings in a U-shape, painted that same faded beige that institutional buildings always seem to be. Same parking lot, with the same potholes in the same places. Same dark tree line at the edge of the property, where the maintained grounds gave way to whatever wild growth the developers hadn't bothered to clear. Same dark blue Honda Accord backed into the same spot, in the same position, at the same angle. He's still there. For a moment, sitting in my car with the engine running, I thought I saw movement in one of the 2nd floor windows. A curtain shifting, a shadow passing behind the glass. I told myself it was my imagination, that I was projecting, that 3 years away hadn't cured me of the paranoia I'd developed in that place. But I couldn't make myself stay. I couldn't make myself walk up those stairs and knock on doors and ask the current residents what they'd noticed. I just drove away, faster than I should have, and I didn't look back. I should go to the police. I should tell them everything. I should give them my recordings and my notes and my timeline of sounds and smells and silences. I should show them the notebook I kept, the one with dates and times and descriptions that seemed insane when I wrote them down, and seem even more insane now, years later, in the light of day. Maybe it would help. Maybe it wouldn't. Maybe they'd finally investigate, finally search his apartment, finally find whatever was behind that door he closed in my face. But maybe there's nothing to find. Maybe I was wrong about all of it. Maybe David Chen is exactly what he appears to be. A quiet, private man with unusual habits who happened to live in a building where bad things happened. Maybe the women who disappeared had nothing to do with him. Maybe Mrs. Nguyen died of exactly what the medical examiner said she died of. Maybe I'm the one who's broken, not him. Maybe I ruined my life and fled my home and spent 3 years looking over my shoulder because of nothing. I don't know. I'll never know. That's the part that keeps me awake at night. Not the fear that I was right, but the fear that I'll never know for certain either way. Sometimes I dream about that hallway, about standing outside his door at 3 a.m, drunk and desperate, demanding answers he was never going to give me. In the dream, The door opens wider than it did in real life. Wide enough for me to see inside. Wide enough for me to step forward, to cross the threshold, to finally know for certain what was happening in that apartment. But I always wake up before I see what's there. I wake up gasping, covered in sweat, my heart racing, the echo of that door swinging open still vivid behind my eyes. Sometimes I think I remember seeing something in the dream, something I can't hold on to when I'm awake, something that slips away, like water through my fingers. But I can never be sure if it's a real memory or just my imagination filling in the blanks with the worst thing it can conceive. Maybe that's for the best. Maybe the not knowing is the only thing that lets me function, lets me pretend to have a normal life, lets me get up in the morning and go to work and smile at strangers and act like I'm not carrying around a weight that will never get lighter. Maybe if I knew for certain, one way or the other, it would destroy me. Either I was wrong and I've wasted years of my life on a delusion, or I was right and I did nothing while people died. I don't know which would be worse. I'm telling this story now because I can't carry it alone anymore. Because those 7 people in that basement, whoever they were, deserved to have someone say that something was wrong and we all should have seen it. Because Rachel Kim deserved to have someone say her name out loud instead of letting it fade into the background noise of unsolved cases no one follows up on. Because the woman in the lobby, the one with the look in her eyes that I still see when I close my own, deserved to have someone remember that she was there. And because I need to believe that saying this will matter, that somewhere, someone will read this and recognize their own neighbor, their own building, their own spiral of suspicion that they've been trying to talk themselves out of. That someone will do what I didn't do. That someone will trust themselves enough to act. Trust your instincts. Please, trust them in ways I didn't. I know how hard that is. I know the pressure to be reasonable, to be fair, to give people the benefit of the doubt. I know how deeply we're conditioned to mind our own business, to assume the best, to tell ourselves that suspicion makes us bad people and paranoia makes us crazy. We're taught from childhood that it's wrong to judge, wrong to assume, wrong to act on feelings that can't be quantified or proven. But sometimes feelings are all we have. Sometimes the gut reaction that something is wrong is the only warning system we're equipped with. Our ancestors survived because they trusted those feelings, because they ran when something felt off, because they didn't wait for proof that the shadow in the trees was actually a predator. Because the thing about monsters is, they don't look like monsters. They look like everyone else. They follow routines and smile at you in hallways and say perfectly normal things about the weather. They have names and jobs and cars they park in designated spots. They nod at you when you pass and hold doors open and remember to say please and thank you. And by the time you realize what they are, by the time you have the proof you've been waiting for, it's already too late. For them, for you, for the people who would still be alive if someone had just trusted themselves enough to say something. I still don't know if David Chen did anything wrong. I don't have proof. I never had proof. All I had was a feeling, and I was too afraid to trust it. Too afraid of being wrong. Too afraid of what it would mean if I was right. But I know that feeling was real. And I know that right now, somewhere, he's still following his routine, still leaving at 7:42 and returning at 6:15, still standing perfectly still in the parking lot, facing the tree line, waiting for something I can't see. If you live in an apartment complex in the suburbs of an unnamed city, and your neighbor across the hall has been there for years without ever really moving in, and you smell something you can't explain, and you hear sounds through the wall that don't make sense, and your instincts are screaming at you that something is wrong, listen to them. Don't be like me. Don't convince yourself that you're paranoid, that there's an innocent explanation, that accusing someone of something terrible based on nothing but a feeling makes you a bad person. Sometimes a feeling is all you get. Sometimes it's the only warning you'll ever receive. And sometimes, by the time you have proof, it's 7 bodies too late. I'm going to stop writing now. I've said everything I can say, everything I've been carrying for 3 years, everything I've been afraid to admit, even to myself. My hands are shaking as I type this. My chest feels tight, but at least it's done. Maybe nothing will come of this. Maybe no one will believe me. Maybe David Chen, or whatever his real name is, will go on living his life and following his routine and doing whatever he does behind that door, in that empty apartment, in the dark hours when normal people sleep. But at least I've said it. At least it's out of my head and into the world, where someone else can carry it for a while. At least, finally, I've told the truth about what I saw and what I didn't do about it. The rest is up to someone else now. I just hope they're braver than I was. I hope they trust themselves enough to act before it is too late.